At WFM Labs, our organization recognizes the importance of gaining market insights to compete effectively and provide better goods and services to our customers. However, exchanging price or commercially sensitive information with competitors can violate antitrust laws and harm competition. To avoid antitrust risk, it is essential to ensure that information exchanges in the WFM Labs community are reasonable and promote competition. This includes avoiding discussions or coordination of sensitive topics such as customer prices, pricing paid to vendors, compensation paid to employees, or proprietary information. If you would like more information, please refer to the guidelines outlined by the FTC and DOJ, Antitrust Guidelines for Collaborations Among Competitors. In addition, WFM Labs meetings are being recorded. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. And finally, we ask that all participants review and comply with our code of conduct. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're here today with a couple of big brains talking about some workforce industry challenges and opportunities. So we've got Ted Lango and Blair McGavin. I'm going to let them do their introductions and tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today.
Hi, it's Ted Lango with WFM Labs and InterDM. Looking forward to the conversation with Blair and Jim discussing industry challenges and opportunities. Blair?
Yes, hey, thank you, gentlemen. I'm like you and your audience. I'm just someone who's passionate about workforce management. And someday I hope to have a product out there called Mozart Software, but we'll see if that ever happens. But I got a bunch of ideas. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I just hope I have some point in my career have the opportunity to deliver some of these ideas. So hopefully we'll have a meaningful discussion today.
Awesome. So anybody who's been with WFM Labs for a little bit probably has heard about my background and Ted's background. So I won't take a lot of time going through that. But Blair, can you tell us a little bit about what your history in the WFM industry is?
Yeah, boy, seems like my entire career. Before we get into my career, I just wanted to say thank you to the two of you, Ted and Jim, for putting together WFM Labs. As a member of the WFM community, as a member of WFM Labs, we need forums like this where we come together, collaborate, share ideas, share some best practices, get some discussions going. So thanks to the two of you for putting this together, and best of luck as you build this community and share ideas and hopefully make the industry a better place and more efficient for all of us to work in. Like most folks out there, boy, I've spent my career doing workforce management and capacity planning and all the fun challenges and struggles that we all deal with in that space. And I've spent a long time thinking about maybe some opportunities for some additional functionality, which initially started off with a financial analysis tool, which I think we'll get to at some point. But yeah, I think there's opportunities out there. We have so many challenges, but Jim, I think I've cheated and shared a list of questions that we'll go through and some of the challenges and opportunities that I think that we have in this space to deliver some better functionality and hopefully make the process easier for us to manage and more efficient at the same time.
And yeah, we do talk obviously a lot within our group and about some of the challenges, and they're pretty widespread. There's a lot of different areas we could talk about: forecasting, planning, scheduling, software, technology. So yeah, I think we'd like to start today and delving a little bit into some of the more complex forecasting challenges, and specifically, as we look at the future and really the current state of WFM, as we add technology to the system and the gig economy starts to rise and we see agents becoming a center focal point of what we're thinking about and what we're doing. I've heard a lot of folks talking about the specifically Erlang C metric and or formula, and really what it does and doesn't do in today's environment. So I know, Ted, you have some opinions on that. Blair, you do as well. Maybe we could start there and hear a little bit about why we don't think that's the formula for forecasting in our present state.
Erlang C, boy, a formula we should all be familiar with. Now, before we bash Erlang C and queuing theory, let's first take our hats off. This is anyone who comes up with that messy formula must have been a really smart mathematician and deserves a little bit of respect. That is a messy formula, but does it work? Now, there might be some out there who think that, you know, it used to work, but our skill-based routing is so complex today, and maybe it doesn't fit very well today. I don't think it ever worked. That's just my opinion, but the margin of error has gotten even bigger with our complex skill-based routing. So yeah, we've got some challenges, but let's maybe ask ourselves a couple of questions. One, which variable in the process is Erlang or queuing theory trying to help us understand? 4 pieces to the puzzle. Well, it's trying to help us understand occupancy. We usually don't see it expressed as that. We start with an incoming workload or so many number of Erlings. Let's say we got 90 Erlings of workload coming in, and it says we need a requirement of 100 agents. So you can do the math, 90 versus 100, with the exception of abandons, we can come up with what our occupancy. And the second question that I would throw out there is, why is occupancy even a part of this process? Why is it one of the variables in our capacity plan? And I think the answer to that question is because we're managing a real-time process. Customers are coming in real time. We have agents logged in real time. We're trying to sync up the two. So there's variability in the process. And Erlang was trying to account for the variability in the process so that we could meet a certain service level expectation. But it just doesn't do the job very well. So two of the biggest takeaways, you know, we're going to look at a matrix here. Don't worry about the detail inside this box, but in this example, we've got 65 different skills and we've got 35 different routing profiles. And every contact center out there has a matrix similar to this. Well, how this matrix is designed, that's one of the key components that drives your occupancy. So we need to understand that occupancy is unique to every contact center. One model that works in one contact center isn't going to work in another. And we actually need models for every skill within this matrix. So this idea of managing occupancy, we need to understand that it is unique to every contact center. So we need models that are customized to our unique configuration. How many skills we have, how many routing profiles we have, and which skills are assigned to which routing profiles. That is one of the key drivers of how occupancy is going to behave in your contact center. So we need unique models that capture that behavior. And the second piece is there are multiple reasons why occupancy is part of the equation. It's not, Erlang is designed to answer within the interval, and the interval's got blinders on it. It doesn't see what happened before or after, but how occupancy behaves within an interval is one thing, but we're trying to build a capacity plan so that over the course of the week, we know how many FTE we need to support the business. Those are the second reasons why we need, so there are multiple models that need to be customized to reflect how occupancy behaves in our respective contexts. So it all needs to be customized. So those are the two biggest takeaways that I'd like us to have after today is understanding, boy, this mysterious variable occupancy, it is unique to each of our contact centers, and our models need to be customized to recognize that uniqueness. Ted, what are your thoughts on it?
Well said. I agree. It's probably one of the most misunderstood concepts, and I think you hit it on the head. Comes down to occupancy, and every one of these environments is different. Multi-skilling is one of the principles behind it, where you just can't layer this on and say this is, you know, this is the right calculation. I just wrote up a paper and shared that with the community, and I believe there's absolutely a place for a calculation for us to really understand the workload versus the headcount that's required based on our service level objectives. But my challenge to the industry has been, rather than try to pin down and plan right at that interval and have just the right number of people, let's think about the model differently so that we consider things like variability, volatility in our productive overhead. It's a different way to look at the model. I believe that whether it's Erlang C, Erlang A, Erlang X, your own custom formula, on top of that, there's more that we can do in the industry to ebb and flow as variability and volatility come out. I think, though, that a number of us have come to exactly what you've said, Blair, is that at the end of the day, the complexity, the routing, it really does require us to look at unique models to each queue. And even if we've got a matrix like you've outlined, it generally isn't fixed. Some of those people might be cross-skilled today, and then all of a sudden we've pulled them out and we've put them into another queue, or we've started to isolate a queue so that we could drive up service level. Right there now, your Erlang C model isn't going to generate the same types of staffing requirements based on that cross-skilling. So I've come to this, not only the same conclusion that whether you start with Erlang C, Erlang A, Erlang B, Erlang X, I've come to the conclusion that yes, you need a customized calculation and you need to start there, but I think we can do more. I think we can start to rethink that staffing level at the interval if we start to rethink how we plan productive overhead. That's where I believe the industry needs to shift, is leveraging automation in a much more dynamic way to allow us to say, we think it's 110 people, and we've used a custom formula to come to that based on our cross-skilling, but variability is still there. So how do we adjust up or adjust down in real time to account for still meeting service level objectives?
Here's one other thought. Regardless of what model you're using, if you're maybe they're using a random number generator, I don't care what model you use, just prove to me after the fact that your model works. So there should be an audit or reconciliation after the interval. Okay, we forecast one thing, we experience something else. Now let's do that reconciliation to figure out what caused the variances, and can we validate that the model actually works?
Well, and that's an interesting challenge, playing a not devil's advocate necessarily, but obviously you two gentlemen have the math brain. I tended to be one of those users. I understand the formulas, I understand the concepts. What I often struggled with is just the day in, day out, right? So I was less concerned about the math and the model that was used. I just wanted to get it right. And what's interesting about that last comment, Blair, is we would often go back and look at the forecast, and we would have a metric. Generally speaking, we were pretty good, plus or minus. What I found interesting is it depends on how far out you go, right? So obviously, the closer to the fact you get, the more accurate your forecast could be. So if I go back and look at my interval forecast from 2 months ago versus the same interval I forecasted 2 days ago, my expectation would be the one that I did 2 days ago is going to look better than the one I did 2 months ago. So how do you solve for time frame in that? And this sort of touches on Ted's comment, right? Is that you can forecast and plan, but at the end of the day, you really have to be able to be flexible and move pieces. So do you have a time frame that you primarily work within on those?
We all do short-term planning, we all do long-term planning. And the more accurately we can do the long-term planning, the more effective we're going to be at planning resources, because that hiring process takes several months. One of the challenges that I see, people, do they worry too much about, okay, is my volume in 3 months going to be 2.1 million phone calls, or is it 2.15 million or 2.07? I don't think that the issues are with that monthly value. What we need, I think, are tools that can pick up on the variances and transition quickly. Okay, based on the trends we're seeing month to date, here's how the rest of the month is going to play out. Where I think the challenges take place, once we know, okay, we're going to get 2 million calls this month, how do we allocate that volume down to the individual intervals? And then how do we build the requirement for each one of those intervals? There are 4 variables. It's not just volume. There's 4 variables in this process. Do we understand all those variables well enough to build the requirement accurately across every interval? And then let's look across the week And how does that convert to FTE requirements across the week? Requirements for an interval and requirements for the week are two very different monsters and beasts that we have to be able to tackle. So I think that's where a lot of the challenge is being introduced, but are the tools we're using smart enough to detect the variances? So we made assumptions about how a handle time was going to behave or how shrinkage was going to be behaving. So are our tools picking up on that variances and then being able to give us accurate projections of how the rest of the month is going to play out?
Yeah. And I think I'd like to wrap it back into where you were going with how do you know that those forecasts are accurate? I'll just cue that question up to you, and I've got some thoughts I want to build on of my lessons. But Blair, what are your thoughts around just going back and testing after the fact? What's that approach? What have you learned along the way that is helpful and can inform your forward forecasts when we just have the question? How do we know service level, volume, handle time is accurate at the end of the day?
Yeah, I've designed some reporting that answers these questions. And you need an item. We're going to look at an example here, a financial example, to get you thinking in this frame of mind. But after the fact, we need to do an audit where we isolate each variable. So each variable has a forecast and the actual is something different. Okay, had that only been the only variance in the process, how much of an impact would each variable have had on our service level outcome? And one of the pieces in this analysis that we need to do is testing the model itself. If in the beginning, we don't know what all the actuals were, but after the fact, we should know what all the actuals were, what our actual volume was, what our actual handle time was, what our actual agents logged in, and then how many of those agents were allocated to support each one of the skills. We should be able to take that information, plug it back into the model, and then the model give us a service level outcome. Well, how does that compare to the actual to validate, does our model have integrity and can we trust its forecast looking into the future? So I've designed something like that. I got to be careful what I show. I don't want to make too much of a pitch, but yeah, we need tools that reconcile the process after the fact, and not just from a service level perspective. At some point, we're going to talk about the financials.
One of the lessons I learned along the way, which was just a very simple lesson, and it ties back to the occupancy question and the complexities. And hats off to Jay Minucci for pointing this out to me earlier in my career, was, we go in with those occupancy assumptions, tied back to Erlang C, like how hot are we running, which is a factor of cross-skilling. At the end of the day, that's a really difficult analysis to go back and try to peel apart. However, a simple way about it is simply to calibrate. If you look at your occupancy and your service level outcome, week, or month, and you pick those ones where things matched up, it was just a really simple way to go back and calibrate. Are my occupancy assumptions, logical for going in? We see this month that we ran, an 80% service level and our occupancy was 87. We saw other months where we were down, and obviously occupancy is up when you're missing service level, and you toss those months out. And then you see the reverse, when we're over delivering and occupancy is down. We ran a 95 service level, occupancy is way down. But if you look at enough data points, you start to get a fairly simple way that people can understand how to calibrate occupancy on as an output to inform how you look at things from an input standpoint. But I agree, where you're going, Blair, is much more down. How do we then take all those variables and build out a framework so that we can understand the variability by each of those variables and its contribution to the miss or the hit? Some people just let it all kind of wash out, but I think that's ultimately sticking your head in the sand and not really understanding how variance comes into play, because that really does inform where we go forward with things.
Yeah, that matrix we looked at, I actually was able to build some customized model that capture how occupancy behaves in that complex matrix. And here's a reference point on how much volatility there is between how the interval behaves and how the weekly FTE behaves. Some of those intervals, some of those skills met service level at 97, 98% occupancy. Some of the really small skills, which Erlang would almost require a 50% occupancy, met service level at 95% occupancy. Yet in our capacity plan, The occupancy value in our capacity plan was down at 85%. So what happens in the interval is one thing, but what happens with our capacity plan, it's a completely different model and completely different aim.
So one of the challenges that the industry definitely faces in this umbrella is bringing in new technologies, things like chat, asynchronous messaging, things of those nature, backline work, certainly elements that I'm pretty certain Erlang wasn't thinking about as related to occupancy and intervals. So do you feel as if you've worked through some of these models and some of these challenges, and as an industry, we're getting where we need to be as it relates to that? Or are we still pretty new at this and need some more time to figure out some of those elements in the contact center?
Here are my thoughts on some of the challenges we face. The inbound ACD is such a perfect process, with the exception that calls abandoned, which Erlang doesn't account for those abandons. So we still have to figure out, okay, how do we account for abandons, which is another model we got to think about. But that inbound ACD captures every second in a unique state for each associate. So we know exactly the handle time components, we know their idle and available components, and we know all the states they're in that fall under shrinkage. So an associate's time, it's either handle time, occupancy, or shrinkage, right? So has the industry figured out how to build that foundation to piece this together so that we can build accurate requirements? No, I don't think they have. But all the raw data elements are there so that we should be able to do it. Now, when we get in these other platforms, whether it's email or chat or SMS or heaven knows what AI is going to introduce, these other platforms, here's my criticism of the industry. These platforms enable an agent to log in, they get the piece of work, they work it, they send it to the customer. So it enables the process, but those platforms are not giving us all the rich data elements that we get from the inbound ACD. So we don't know. So this whole idea, do we want to manage chat, email, SMS from a service level perspective? Well, if we want to measure a service level, that introduces occupancy. And if we need to, we need to be able to understand the relationship between occupancy and service level. We need to capture that idle time component. Are these tools and platforms giving us that information so that we can do that? And then we introduce, okay, I'm not just doing one chat at a time, I'm doing 2 or 3. So the data gets blurred, and it's going to force us to be much more creative if we don't have that unique occupancy element so that we can customize a model around it. So yes, have I thought about it? Yes. Can it be done? Yes. But the data just isn't as rich on these other channels that we get from the inbound ACD. Ed, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's I agree, and there's a lot coming at us. We've been looking at multi-channel and quote omni-channel. I haven't honestly seen an environment that is truly omni-channel, but multi-channel, introducing just pre-AI things like chat, email, other channels, and then having people oscillate between without that data coming out causes a problem. We don't have a good grasp on how to set those assumptions into the overarching model. I think AI, that's part of our thesis at WFM Labs is AI is coming, it's coming quickly. AI bots, human assisted AI, AI assisted humans is going to change the mix even in a more dramatic way. And I believe, even though we've seen chat for some time, I'll call it kind of unintelligent chat, as intelligent chat starts to come in play, and you've got agents needing to run side by side with bots, that's just another stream of data where we're not going to have the richness like we have out of the ACD. How do we solve it? I think that's for us to figure out as an industry. The great thing about AI coming at us is AI is also a pretty powerful tool, and machine learning models, I think, are where people are really going to start to go here going forward, is out of just these traditional Excel-based spreadsheets and really taking time series data, tabular time series data, and leveraging machine learning in ways that have been out there in the industry for a while, but really not adopted by the contact center industry. So it's some exciting stuff. I mean, it's one of the areas that I'm pretty passionate about talking about going forward, is coming up with those new models, the new technology, the new equations that'll allow us to, work with truly multi-channel that's getting a lot smarter.
I think it can be done, but my fear is these channels are going to enable new processes, but they're not going to give us the data necessarily that we need to manage the process efficiently.
Yeah.
Well, and that sort of leads to the next question. So as we kind of look
is this question on my list or not?
It just might be. So as we look at the industry and we think about history and what it's been built around, how standardized is the industry at capacity planning?
All right. 3 of us on the call. Ted, you got a career of experience here. Jim, you've got a career of experience. I've got a career of experience. Each one of us on this phone call would build a different capacity. So, and early on in my career, I thought, after helping a few companies, I've seen everything. There's no way I'm going to see something different from what I've seen. Now I'm convinced that if I audited every company's methodology for capacity planning, I would see something I've never seen before. We're all doing it differently. Now let's think about it in an analogy. Let's think about going to the grocery store. If you go from your house to the grocery store, we could design 15 or 20 different routes. But as long as we ended up at the grocery store, we're okay. But with capacity planning, we all have a different methodology. If we all come up with the same answer, then no harm, no foul. I think we're okay. But the problem is we're all coming up with slightly different answers. And in some cases, significantly different answers. We don't have a lot of confidence in our workforce management tool at building that capacity plan. And I could spend forever talking about that because that's where the issues are. But building those requirements, understanding how each of these variables behaves, we don't trust the workforce management software. So we're all kind of being forced to become capacity planning experts, and we're all building a different process. So we need some standardization. And to the extent that I've seen people try to give a standardization, it's much too simplistic. Never underestimate the complexity of capacity planning. It is so difficult. And the more I've thought about it, and the more I've you lift up a rock and you know what? I find 4 more issues, and then I lift up those rocks and I find other issues. It is super complicated to build a capacity plan, not just for a back office environment, but when you get into these real-time environments where you have to understand how each variable and metric behaves every interval of the week, it is super messy. It just presents a lot of challenges. So I hope we get to a point where we can equate our workforce management tool with a competent capacity planning process.
Yeah, and Ted, I know, Blair, you mentioned, hey, if you went and looked at a bunch, I know, Ted, you've looked at a bunch, right? And you would probably agree with Blair that, yep, everybody has something different. And so what are your thoughts on A, what they're doing out there, and B, how do we move to that, sort of ideal state where, we may not be using the same thing, but we're getting the right answer, not slight variations. And then sort of a second part to that question is, once you've created the capacity plan, again, the larger, here's how many humans we need, then you have to get the humans in the right spot. So how do you connect that with that, interval level schedule?
I've looked at probably 80 to 90 different contact center operations across different industries, and agree with Blair 100%. Every one of them is different. When we're looking at capacity planning, once we step out of our traditional WFM software packages that manage the shortest term, the interval data, and the scheduling, you're really looking at people who are saying, well, this particular telecom or this particular insurance company or this particular healthcare or this particular travel agency, they all have different inputs, different layers, and build essentially their own capacity planning framework. So I agree. I think it'd be hard to find 2 that were the same. I mean, everyone is now layering in. You take in your IVR volume. Nope, we just do agent offer. No, we take our IVR. We see very very different approaches from every company. The irony here is we're all going after the same thing as the output. How many people do I need to hit a service level objective? It's kind of ironic that the end result of us planning and at the optimal dollar, the end result of us planning is the same every company you go to. I want just enough people to make sure I'm hitting my service level objectives and at a dollar that has been optimized so that I keep my CFO happy. I think in the end, you will never have a standardized framework, that they really do need to be custom, but we can customize with a standard set of processes that still lead us to the end result itself. There are going to be other variables. This is an area that I'm fairly passionate about. I think if you ask 9 out of 10 or maybe more workforce planning professionals, they're going to tell you, how do I forecast the future? We're principally looking at what happened in the past, and we're often just taking the ACD data to say, well, here's what happened last June. Here's what's going to happen this June. Oh yeah, I may have in my budget process baked in 5% growth or some assumptions around handle time coming down. But when we look at building plans going forward, the emphasis is historical patterns are what inform the future with some business, maybe insight layered on top. The reality is every one of our plans has other variables that we could be seeking to identify as indicators of really what's driving my day-by-day variance, and how do we keep our finger on that pulse in a continuous way, rather than just try to think about, here was last year's calls, here's next year's plus or minus 5%. Let's start to ingest those variables that also inform what's happening with short-term variance. Look, if you're an ice cream salesman and you're running an ice cream business, weather influences it. So yes, I may have sold this many gallons of ice cream last June, and I may be selling this many, thinking I'm selling this many, but clearly my weather is going to have an impact on whether or not I've got positive or negative variance. I believe the framework for the future of standardizing it is really an approach that takes in these other data elements on top of the core data that allow us to make better informed decisions.
How do we, once we figure that out, right, then link that? So you have these disparate processes all getting to one capacity plan. Now I need that plan to turn into schedules and staffing, right?
Yeah. I do think as an industry, we have focused fairly heavy on the demand side, and it really is a supply and demand question every day. We forecast demand and we try to get very precise about, okay, what are those drivers? Although a lot of it is just historical trends. At the end of the day, do we do as much forecasting activity on the supply side? And do we really think about the variance as deeply as we can? What's driving people to call out absent on any given day? Can we get more accurate about day by day absence rates? What's causing people to attrit? How do we really get our hands around those other variables that are just as important as the demand side? You could be 100% spot on the call volume and the workload, call volume and handle time for the day, but if you're off in either direction on the staff side, then you've got a mismatch. So I think we have spent as an industry a disproportionate amount of time. I mean, it's important to have a strong demand forecast, but it's just as important to look at supply. The last thing on this is it's a continuous thing. One of the areas that I've struggled with over the years is you've got your interval level data, you then pull it out day by day for the week and for the month. You then got your monthly data that you're aggregating in to look out 120 days for the hiring, and then you're pulling all that stuff back up to your budget, and then basically going back down the other direction, deconstructing the budget into monthly into daily into your WFM software. That I've seen as a fairly fragmented set of processes over the years. Yeah, they're connected, but why don't we think about capacity planning as just an ongoing living set of data that's updated continuously rather than having to stop, sit down, extract, compile, and then get it up to the budget and then compile it or deconstruct it back down to actually operationalize it. One of the areas that I feel is a really open for someone to go and grab is the connection of all these pieces. How do we just have a living capacity plan that's not just based on the history, but also based on those variables that we go out and seek to uncover?
In terms of challenges to the industry, and specific the forecasting, Blair, what would you call out as the biggest challenges we face,
I think it's not figuring out what the monthly volume is going to be. I think the biggest challenge is, okay, how that gets distilled down to the interval level, building requirements for every interval, and then building a more optimal set of schedules that match those requirements. I think that's where we're losing some efficiency is on the other pieces of the puzzle, building requirements and more efficient schedules. Ted alluded to a few things. One, the variability. So Erlang assumes staffing is fixed. There's variability in demand, but the staffing is fixed. I did an analysis once. I was curious, hey, I wonder how stable our staffing is during an interval. Guess what the result was? Boy, it's just as volatile as the demand. You can take a snapshot. Every 30 seconds or 60 seconds, look at how much workload is in the system and how many agents we have logged in. Boy, they're both just moving around like this and this. It's just up and down. So yeah, Erlang has a lot of assumptions. It never really worked. It really doesn't work now. But another thing 2 points Ted made that I want to come back to. Reconciling variances, doing postmortems on not just service level forecast, but budget forecast, unit cost forecast, staffing forecast. If we can see after the fact, we made these assumptions, but actuals were like this, and we're making these assumptions on these variables that are incorrect, guess what? We need to adjust our remainder of year assumptions. And what does the new scenario look like? And then, Ted, you talked about tying this all together. This tool, Mozart Software, that I hope to build someday, it's basically 5 applications in one. It's the WFM, it's the capacity planning, it's strategic planning, it's the financial analysis, and it's the variance reporting. So I want to tie the financials into this whole process. That's the frontier that I think nobody's tapped into. And, what do we understand about our unit cost? Well, we spent $10 million last month. We answered 2 million phone calls. Our cost per call is $5 a call. Guess what? I've designed 6 to 10 layers of variance reports that help us see and understand from a budget level down to individual unit costs. This is where your money is going. There's the opportunity. Here are the efficiencies. We need more of this. We need less of that. So if we can see that financial picture, that's the next frontier where I think we can really save some money.
At the end of the day, money talks, and being able to tie back variance into the impact is an area that I've seen very few people, do successfully. I've had some limited success with it, really partnering with your finance department to begin with, because quite often there just isn't a connection between the data sets that come out of WFM and the contact center, other than, hey, you guys have 3,500 headcount and you're off by a dollar amount because you've got 3,600 this month instead of 3,500. Well, why? And at the end, I know in the industry, a lot of us have experienced that why, and have had to go and do spreadsheet analysis kind of offline by taking those variables. But you're absolutely right, Blair. I think there's a huge opportunity to connect the pieces and really be able to understand, how each of the variances impact the bottom line.
What's interesting to me, Ted, is that, we've talked a lot about that risk-based planning as well. We all know how difficult it is to work with finance, develop a plan, and then nail every point of that plan the following year so that your budget comes out just perfect. Now, generally, they don't mind if you come in under budget, but if you come in over, that becomes problematic. And the fact is, really plan as you may, your budget's going to fall within a range, right? And there's a risk that it will not hit. So I do think it, to Ted's point, it would be a huge win to be able to quickly go back and assess, hey, here's what impacted us, here's how much it impacted us, and where does it fall within the risk we accepted, right? So, yeah, I'm certainly interested in hearing and learning more about how something like that would work, Blair.
Here's a kind of a final thought on that note. So we talk about building a foundation to be able to predict service levels. The issues with service levels, it's not just this black box formula Erlang that's missing. We need a better understanding of the inputs. We have to understand the inputs, and we plug the inputs into a model, and then we can predict a solid service level. But the foundation that will enable us to accurately predict and manage service levels, it's also the same foundation that will allow us to do the detailed analysis on the financials on the backside. So it's the same foundation that's going to serve both purposes.
Well, that's all I had. Anybody else want to touch on anything else? Any points?
So the two takeaways: occupancy is the big mystery variable. It is unique to your contact center. So there's no canned algorithm that's going to tell us how occupancy behaves in your contact center. And there are multiple reasons why occupancy is part of the model and part of the equation. We need models to tell us, okay, how much occupancy are we losing at the different stages of the process? And then this concept of, after the fact, being able to do a post-mortem. Help me see an itemized breakdown. You know, the budget, we spent 5.4 million, we forecast 5 million. Okay, why did we spend $400,000? Every variable in the process contributes to those variances. So we need an itemized breakdown as to why we spent more money. We need an itemized breakdown as to why we didn't hit our service level. So we need to think a little bit differently, but it's going to force us to manage the process at a more granular level than we have in the past.
Well, thank you very much. It was great chatting with everybody today. Ted, thanks for your time. Blair, thanks for bringing your ideas and thoughts and comments to us. And we hope to see everybody out there on WFM Labs.
Jim and Ted, thank you for the forum. You guys are awesome. You're doing a great job and great service to the community.
Yeah, thanks, Blair. I want to thank you as well. We'd love hearing from you. Love to hear from others who have ideas on this topic. And we just encourage everyone to contribute to the community. Thanks again, Blair.